The Stellar Combat Academy hung like a crystalline spider web in the void between Centauri Prime's triple suns. Its transparent corridors and training domes caught starlight and scattered it in prismatic arrays, a deliberate display of architectural prowess that had intimidated applicants for over 3 millennia. But Raven Shaw didn't feel intimidated, she felt hungry. The transport ship's pilot, a methane-breathing Kryllik with too many eyes and a barely concealed disdain for oxygen breathers, had spent the entire journey making subtle comments about human fragility. Raven had smiled politely through it all, letting her silence speak louder than words. Now, as they approached the Academy's main docking ring, the pilot finally asked the question that had clearly been bothering him. Why do you even try, soft skin? The dropout rate for Class 3 species is 98%. Humans are Class 5. Raven adjusted the collar of her standard-issue jumpsuit, making sure the small medallion, her lucky charm from Earth's Special Forces, stayed hidden. I suppose I'm not very good at statistics, she replied, watching as the docking clamps engaged with a soft thud. The Academy's receiving chamber was a marvel of xenological engineering. The air pressure, gravity, and atmospheric composition shifted in subtle waves, creating zones of comfort for dozens of different species simultaneously. Raven noticed how the other candidates naturally drifted to their respective comfort zones, the silicon-based Petrovi crystallines gravitating toward the high-pressure areas, while the gaseous Etherian collective hovered near the ceiling in their containment suits. High Commandant Zorax, a being composed entirely of living plasma contained within an ancient battle suit, floated at the chamber center. His voice resonated directly in their minds, a standard practice for addressing multi-species gatherings. Welcome, candidates. You represent the finest warriors from 57 species across 3 galactic arms. Only 10% of you will graduate. Only 1% will achieve elite status. The rest will fail, return home in shame, or die trying. A ripple of nervous energy passed through the chamber. Raven remained still, focusing on controlling her breathing as she'd been taught. The high-gravity training on Earth would help here, but it wouldn't be enough. She needed more. Your first evaluation begins now, Zorax announced. Combat Master Tirleth will assess your basic capabilities. A figure emerged from the shadows, moving with impossible grace. Tirleth belonged to the legendary Shadow Dancer species, beings of pure kinetic energy given form through unknown means. His voice was like silk over steel. Divided by species. Petrovi to Chamber 1. Etherians to Chamber 2. Human. He paused, dark energy swirling where eyes should be. How curious. Chamber 13. The number sent murmurs through the crowd. Chamber 13 was notorious, it had been designed for testing the deadliest predator species in known space. Raven caught whispers of death wish and protein chain arrogance as she made her way to the designated door. The chamber was a perfect sphere, its walls lined with neural-reactive plates that could generate any environment or opponent. As the door sealed behind her, Raven heard Tirletha's voice again. Your species has no natural weapons. No evolutionary advantages. No genetic enhancements. What do you have, human? Raven unzipped her jumpsuit collar, letting the old medallion catch the light. It had been given to her by her commander after the Mars colony crisis, when she'd held off 30 insurgents with nothing but a broken rifle and improvisated traps. We have adaptation, she answered. We have innovation. And most importantly, she settled into a ready stance. We have history. The chamber came alive, reality bending as the neural plates activated. A creature of nightmare materialized, 12 feet of armor and muscle, borrowed from the genome of the galaxy's apex predators. Raven smiled. Begin, Tirleth commanded. The beast charged, its mass defying the chamber's artificial gravity. Any other species would have dodged, would have played to their natural strengths. Raven charged right back. The move was so unexpected, so contrary to survival instincts, that the beast actually hesitated for a fraction of a second. That fraction was all she needed. Raven had studied every piece of xenobiological data available about the Academy's assessment creatures. This one, despite its terrifying appearance, had been engineered from predominantly predatory species. And all predators shared certain fundamental traits, including the instinct to avoid head-on collision with prey. She ducked at the last possible moment, using the beast's own momentum and mass against it. Her fingers found pressure points that shouldn't have existed on such a chimeric creature, but she had gambled correctly on the engineers using standard nerve cluster patterns. The beast stumbled, its roar of rage turning to confusion as its left side went temporarily numb. Raven was already moving, not pressing her advantage but preparing for the creature's adaptation. That was the key that so many failed to grasp. It wasn't about winning the first exchange. It was about learning, adapting, surviving long enough to understand your opponent. From his observation post, Tirletha's energy patterns shifted in what might have been surprise. The human wasn't fighting like a warrior of her class level. She wasn't fighting like any known species. She was fighting like evolution itself, testing, failing, adapting, succeeding in tiny increments. The assessment continued for 20 minutes, 3 times longer than standard. When it finally ended, Raven stood bleeding from several minor wounds but unbowed. The beast lay unconscious, defeated not by strength or special ability, but by a methodical deconstruction of its fighting patterns. Tirletha's form solidified slightly, a sign of intense focus among his kind. You knew you couldn't overpower it. Couldn't outmaneuver it. Couldn't survive a direct confrontation. Yet you chose to engage anyway. Why? Raven wiped blood from a small cut above her eye. Because that's what humans do, sir. We don't win because we're stronger or faster or better. We win because we never learned that we couldn't. The combat master was silent for a long moment. Finally, he spoke again, his tone carrying an emotion that didn't translate well to any known language. Welcome to the Stellar Combat Academy, Candidate Shaw. You have successfully proven that my assessment protocols are in need of adaptation. As Raven left Chamber 13, she caught glimpses of other candidates watching her with new eyes. She had passed the first test, but she knew this was just the beginning. The Academy would throw much worse at her, and she would need every ounce of human ingenuity to survive. But that was fine. After all, humanity had been surviving impossible odds since they first looked up at the stars and decided to reach them. The Academy's mess hall was a testament to xenobiological diversity, with feeding stations designed for everything from plasma ingestion to photosynthesis. Raven sat alone at her designated oxygen breather table, analyzing nutrient blocks that supposedly replicated Earth cuisine. 3 weeks had passed since her arrival, and the whispers had only grown louder. The human survived another session, a Quantic student buzzed, its crystalline form refracting light in patterns of disbelief. 4th time in the gravity chamber. Impossible, replied its companion, a towering Nexian warrior whose scales shifted colors with emotion. Currently, they displayed skeptical purple. No Class 5 species can endure repeated exposure to variable gravity training. Raven ignored them, focusing instead on the data pad before her. She had spent every free moment studying the Academy's training protocols, looking for patterns others had missed. The gravity chamber was just the beginning, she needed to understand everything. A shadow fell across her table. Looking up, she found herself face to face with Junior Commander Vexthor, the Academy's head of advanced combat training. His 3 heads regarded her with different expressions: curiosity, contempt, and something harder to read. Candidate Shaw, all 3 heads spoke in perfect synchronization. Your performance has drawn attention. Not all of it favorable. Raven set down her data pad. Is there a problem with my results, sir? The problem, his middle head snarled while the others remained neutral, is that you're breaking parameters. The gravity chamber is designed to test natural resistance to gravitational stress. Yet you've somehow managed to complete 4 sessions without any biological advantages. I studied the chamber's gravitational wave patterns, sir. They're not random, they follow mathematical progressions. Once you understand the pattern, you can anticipate the shifts and adjust your body position accordingly. All 3 heads blinked in surprise. You mapped the gravity waves? That's not possible. The patterns are quantum encrypted. No encryption is perfect, sir. Humans have a saying, every lock has a key. Sometimes that key is just understanding how the lock was built. The right head smiled, a rare gesture from a trigon. Interesting. Perhaps you'd care to test that theory in tomorrow's advanced combat trials? Usually reserved for 3rd cycle students, but I'm making an exception. Raven recognized the trap but knew she couldn't decline. I would be honored, sir. After Vexthor left, a new figure approached, a Luminoth named Kira X whose bioluminescent patterns marked her as a senior candidate. Her light threads pulsed with gentle blues and greens. That was either very brave or very foolish, Kira X said, settling into the seat across from Raven. Vexthor doesn't make exceptions, he makes examples. You sound like you're speaking from experience. Kira X's patterns shifted to a melancholic purple. 2 cycles ago, my clutch mate showed exceptional promise. Vexthor challenged her to advanced trials. The lights dimmed. She didn't survive. I'm sorry, Raven said softly. But I'm not your clutch mate. And I'm not trying to show exceptional promise, I'm just trying to survive. By breaking every parameter they set? By solving quantum encrypted gravity patterns? Kira X leaned forward, her lights now pulsing with intense curiosity. What drives you, human? Why risk everything to prove yourself in an institution that's clearly designed to exclude your kind? Raven touched the medallion at her throat. Because someone has to be first. Someone has to show that parameters aren't just meant to be broken, sometimes they need to be completely rewritten. The next morning, Raven stood in the advanced combat arena, facing 3 opponents, a Nexian warrior, a Quantix adept, and a Trigon battlemaster. The terms were simple, survive 5 minutes against all 3 simultaneously. As the signal to begin sounded, Raven didn't move. She stood perfectly still, eyes closed, listening. The Nexian charged first, they always did. The Quantix began its phase shift, while the Trigon started weaving its infamous 3-part attack pattern. Then Raven smiled. She had spent all night studying everything she could find about these 3 species. The Nexian's color-shifting scales weren't just for show, they were indicators of imminent muscle movement. The Quantix's phase shift generated a distinctive subsonic frequency. And the Trigon's 3-part attacks, while devastating, required perfect synchronization between all 3 combat minds. What happened next would be debated in the Academy for cycles to come. Raven moved like water, each action flowing into the next with precise purpose. She used the Nexian's charge to disrupt the Quantix's phase shift, then used the resulting energy discharge to break the Trigon's synchronization. 4 minutes and 30 seconds later, she stood alone in the arena. Her opponents lay scattered, alive but thoroughly defeated. The silence in the observation deck was absolute. Vexthor's voice crackled over the comm, how? For the first time, all 3 heads spoke with the same emotion, astonishment. Humans have another saying, sir, Raven replied, wiping blood from a split lip. Knowledge isn't just power, it's survival. Later, in the medical bay, Kira X found her again. The Luminotha's patterns were dancing with excited colors Raven had never seen before. You've done it, Kira X said. You've shown them something they've never seen before. But her lights dimmed slightly. You've also made powerful enemies. The traditional powers here don't like change. Raven finished applying a regeneration patch to her arm. Change doesn't care what anyone likes. It comes anyway. The only choice is whether to adapt or get left behind. As she spoke those words, neither of them could have known how prophetic they would prove to be. The Academy was about to face changes that would shake it to its very foundations, and at the center of it all would be one human who refused to accept the parameters others had set for her species. The revolution had begun. Not with plasma weapons or quantum bombs, but with something far more powerful, the simple, unstoppable human drive to prove that impossible was just another parameter waiting to be broken. In the twilight hours of the Academy's artificial night cycle, Raven found herself in the Forbidden Archives. Not technically forbidden, just restricted to species with higher psychic sensitivity than humans supposedly possessed. But locks, whether physical or psychic, were just puzzles waiting to be solved. The holographic displays hummed with ancient knowledge, their quantum matrices spinning tales of warfare and evolution across the galaxies. Raven's fingers danced across the controls, searching for something specific, information about the last species that had tried to change the Academy's rigid hierarchy. Fascinating choice of late-night reading. The voice manifested directly in her mind, carrying undertones of amusement and curiosity. Raven turned to find herself facing a being she'd only seen from afar, Princess Zarathul of the Nephilim, the most powerful telepathic species known to exist. "Your Highness," Raven said, bowing slightly. "I didn't expect anyone else to be here during night cycle." "Clearly," Zarathul replied, her form shifting between solid and ethereal states, a common trait among her kind. "Just as I didn't expect to find a human capable of bypassing our psychic barriers. Those are designed to stop even moderate telepaths." "They're very impressive barriers," Raven admitted. "But they're still based on patterns. Patterns can be understood, and what can be understood can be overcome," Zarathul finished. "Yes, we've noticed this recurring theme in your approach to obstacles." The princess moved closer, her ethereal form casting soft light across the archive's dark corners. "You're looking for information about the Synthetics' rebellion." It wasn't a question. 300 cycles ago, they challenged the Academy's species classification system. They disappeared shortly after. "Is that what the public records say?" Zarathul's form solidified completely, a sign of intense focus. "Would you like to know what really happened?" Raven felt her pulse quicken. "Why would you share such information with me?" "Because, Raven Shaw, you've already set something in motion that cannot be stopped. The old guards are gathering against you. Vexthor has called for an emergency council meeting. They fear what you represent." "And what's that?" "Change." Zarathul waved her hand, and new holographic displays sprang to life. The synthetics didn't disappear. They were eliminated because they proved something dangerous, that the entire species classification system is fundamentally flawed. Just as you're proving now. The displays showed battles, strategies, innovations that had been erased from official records. The synthetics had developed ways to upgrade themselves, adapting to each challenge until they could match even the highest-rated species. The Council couldn't allow that knowledge to spread, Zarathul continued. It would have undermined the entire power structure of the Galactic Alliance. So they created an accident during a training exercise. All evidence was erased. Raven absorbed this information, her mind already racing with implications. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because history is about to repeat itself." The princess's eyes glowed with inner light. "Unless we stop it." "We?" "You're not the only one who sees the need for change, Raven Shaw. Some of us have been waiting centuries for the right moment, the right catalyst." She gestured at the displays. "Your success has forced the Council to act sooner than they planned. They're implementing something called Protocol Zero." The name sent a chill down Raven's spine. "What is it?" "A purge. Not just of you, but of every candidate and instructor who might support reform. They'll disguise it as a training accident, just like with the synthetics. Zarathul's form flickered with barely contained emotion. Unless we strike first. You're talking about rebellion. I'm talking about evolution. Real evolution, not the artificial hierarchies they've created. The princess extended her hand, energy crackling between her fingers. I can teach you to unlock abilities they claim humans don't possess. In return, I need your help to expose the truth before they can bury it again. Raven looked at the offered hand, thinking of all the others who had been erased from history for daring to challenge the established order. If we fail, we die, Zarathul finished simply. But if we succeed, we change everything. No more artificial barriers. No more species classifications. Just pure potential, waiting to be unleashed. The weight of the moment pressed down on Raven like high-gravity training. This was more than personal survival now. This was about every species that had ever been told they weren't good enough, strong enough, evolved enough. She took Zarathul's hand. The contact sent jolts of psychic energy through her nervous system, awakening sensations she'd never known humans could experience. First lesson, the princess said, her voice now resonating directly in Raven's consciousness. Everything they told you about human limitations? It was a lie. As the archive's holographic displays swirled around them, Raven began to understand the true scope of what she'd stumbled into. This wasn't just about proving humanity's worth anymore. This was about freeing every species to reach their full potential. The revolution was about to become an evolution, and it would start right here in the heart of the system that had tried to prevent it. The Academy's central spire pulsed with emergency lighting, casting crimson shadows through its crystalline corridors. Raven moved silently through the maintenance ducts, her mind still reeling from the changes Zarathul's training had awakened. She could feel the thoughts of others now, not clearly enough to read them, but enough to sense their presence and general emotional state. Behind her, Kira X's bioluminescence was dimmed to its lowest setting. The Luminoth had joined their cause after discovering her clutch mate's death hadn't been an accident. Ahead, 3 more allies waited, a reformed Quantix named Vex, no relation to the commander, a Nexian warrior called Thorax, and a young Trigon rebel whose 3 heads had chosen the singular name Unity. Security protocols are changing, Vex transmitted through their encrypted neural link, another gift from Zarathul's training. They're initiating containment procedures in sectors 7 through 12. Right on schedule, Raven thought back. The plan was simple but dangerous. While the Council gathered for their emergency session, they would access the Academy's core database and broadcast the truth to every connected system in the galaxy. The evidence Zarathul had gathered over centuries would expose not just the synthetic's fate, but countless other atrocities committed to maintain the species hierarchy. A sudden psychic tremor nearly made Raven lose her balance. Something's wrong, she transmitted. Zarathul's in trouble. The princess had positioned herself near the council chamber, ready to prevent any psychic detection of their team. But now her mental presence was fading, like a star being swallowed by a black hole. Trap, Unity's 3-part voice echoed in their minds. They knew. They were waiting. Raven made a split-second decision. New plan. Kira X, take Vex and Unity to the backup terminal in Sector 9. Thorax, you're with me. We're getting Zarathul. The mission, Kira X began, is about saving everyone, Raven finished. Including our own. They split up, Raven and Thorax heading toward the council chamber. The Nexian warriors' scales had shifted to deep crimson, battle colors. They encountered their first resistance at a security checkpoint, 2 Petrovi guards in crystalline battle armor. Remember your training, Raven transmitted to Thorax. The Nexian had struggled with human combat concepts at first, but now. Thorax moved like liquid metal, his natural armor flowing in patterns that mimicked human martial arts. The guard's crystalline forms shattered against his adapted fighting style. Raven had taught him that strength wasn't about hitting harder, it was about hitting smarter. They found Zarathul in a psi-dampening field, surrounded by council guards. The princess's ethereal form was painfully solid, forced into a single state by the dampening technology. But she was smiling. Right on time, she transmitted weakly. They took the bait. Raven's enhanced senses suddenly registered the truth. The council chamber was empty. The real meeting. Sector 9, she breathed. They're waiting at the backup terminal. Go, Zarathul commanded. I can free myself now that they've shown their technology. This was never about me, it's about what happens next. Raven hesitated for a fraction of a second, then turned and ran. Her mind reached out to warn the others, but the neural link was dead. They were being jammed. The route to Sector 9 became a gauntlet. Every security system in the academy had been activated, but Raven had spent months studying them all. She didn't try to overpower them, she simply flowed through their blind spots, used their patterns against them. She arrived to find chaos. The backup terminal room was a battlefield. Kira X lay wounded, her lights flickering weakly. Unity was locked in combat with Vexthor himself, all 6 heads engaged in a deadly dance. And Vex. Vex stood at the terminal, his crystalline form glowing with transmitted data. But something was wrong. His patterns were all wrong. I had wondered, a new voice echoed through the chamber, how long it would take a human to reach this point. From the shadows emerged a figure Raven had never seen before, tall, elegant, with skin like polished obsidian. I am Archon Prime, he said. The last survivor of the Synthetics Rebellion. Understanding dawned. You're not here to help expose the truth, Raven said. You're here to ensure it stays hidden. For 300 cycles, I have guided this academy from the shadows. Each time a species showed too much potential, too much adaptability, I ensured they were redirected. The Archon's eyes glowed with ancient power. The hierarchy must be maintained. Order must prevail. Order. Raven's voice cracked with emotion. You're enforcing artificial limitations on entire species. Denying them the chance to evolve, to grow. Evolution must be controlled, the Archon replied. Surely you've seen what unrestricted advancement leads to. The synthetics nearly destroyed themselves with their upgrades. The Nephilim's psychic powers drove dozens of their colonies mad. Even humans. He smiled coldly. Especially humans, with their relentless drive to push beyond their limits. You're too dangerous to be allowed true advancement. You're wrong, Raven said, her newly awakened abilities surging. Evolution isn't about control. It's about adaptation, change, the messy, chaotic process of becoming something new. Something better. The Archon's form began to shift, revealing weapons and abilities that shouldn't have been possible. Then let us test that theory, human. Show me this evolution you believe in so strongly. As alarms blared and battles raged around them, Raven faced the ultimate architect of the system she'd been fighting. But now she understood, this wasn't just about proving humanity's worth. This was about freeing every species to find their own path to advancement, no matter how messy or unpredictable that path might be. The true revolution was about to begin. The backup terminal room had become a nexus of chaos. Energy weapons scarred the walls, psychic residue distorted the air, and at the center of it all, Raven faced the living embodiment of the system she'd been fighting against. Archon Prime's form continued to shift, displaying centuries of stolen evolutionary advantages. You see, he said, voice resonating with artificial harmonics. This is controlled evolution. Perfect adaptation without the messiness of natural selection. Perfect? Raven's newly awakened senses could feel the wrongness in his mutations. Look at yourself. You're not evolved, you're trapped. frozen in patterns you stole from others. The Archon attacked. His speed was impossible, his strength beyond any natural species. But Raven had learned from every fight, every failure, every moment of adaptation. She didn't try to match his abilities. Instead, she watched for the patterns, the microscopic delays between power shifts, the subtle tells before each transformation. Your species, the Archon growled, his right arm morphing into a Nexian blade, refuses to accept its limitations. You infect others with your dangerous ideas. Raven ducked under the blade, noting how his balance shifted. We don't accept limitations because we understand something you never will. She rolled past a blast of psychic energy. True strength isn't about being perfect. It's about being adaptable. Across the room, Unity had finally gained the upper hand against Vexthor. The young Trigon's three heads worked in perfect synchronization, not through rigid control, but through harmony. They had learned from Raven that diversity of thought was strength, not weakness. Kira XS wounds were healing, her bioluminescent patterns forming new configurations never seen before in her species. She had discovered that light could be more than communication, it could be focused, transformed, weaponized. You're losing control, Raven told the Archon, seeing the fear beneath his perfect facade. Just like you've always feared. But not because of some grand rebellion. You know nothing. He launched a combination attack that should have been unstoppable, Quantix phase shifting combined with Nephilim psychic assault and Petrovi crystalline armor. But Raven had been teaching others more than just combat techniques. She had shown them how to think differently, how to question, how to grow. And now, as alarms blared and battles raged throughout the academy, that knowledge was spreading. Through their neural link, she could feel it happening. Candidates and instructors alike were awakening to new possibilities. Species that had been told they could never work together were forming spontaneous alliances. Ancient barriers were breaking down not through force, but through understanding. This is real evolution, Raven said, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. Not taking from others, but growing together. Learning, failing, adapting, messy and chaotic and absolutely beautiful. The Archon's next attack faltered as his stolen abilities began to conflict with each other. You'll destroy everything. The hierarchy maintains peace. No, Zarathul's voice echoed as she materialized in the chamber, freed from her restraints. The hierarchy maintains control. And that time is over. The princess's psychic power had evolved beyond its previous limits, not through theft or artificial enhancement, but through genuine growth. She had learned from Raven that boundaries were meant to be explored, not enforced. Together, they launched their final assault. Not with weapons or stolen powers, but with truth. Through the backup terminal, they broadcast everything, the synthetic's real fate, the Archon's manipulation, and most importantly, proof that every species had the potential for unlimited growth if given the chance. The Archon's perfect form began to break down, centuries of stolen evolution rebelling against artificial control. You don't understand what you've done, he gasped. The chaos is necessary, Raven finished. Because that's how real evolution works. As the Academy's security systems finally shut down, as the neural network buzzed with newly awakened possibilities, Raven looked at her unlikely allies. Kira XS lights danced with new patterns. Unity's three heads smiled in perfect harmony. Zarathul's form shifted between states not from lack of control, but from embracing new potential. The revolution they had started would reshape galactic society. The rigid hierarchy would be replaced by something more dynamic, more adaptable. It wouldn't be perfect, it would be messy and challenging and sometimes dangerous. But that was the point. Real evolution wasn't about reaching some idealized final form. It was about constant growth, endless adaptation, the courage to fail and learn and try again. As dawn broke over the Academy's crystalline spires, Raven touched the medallion at her throat one last time. She had come here to prove humanity's worth, but she had achieved something far greater. She had helped spark an evolution that would continue long after this day, not just for humans, but for every species ready to embrace their true potential. The age of artificial limitations was over. The real journey was just beginning.